Welcome back to the European VC podcast. Today we're thrilled to welcome Charles Dunn, Principal at SV Health Investors, and Ruth McKernan, CBE and Operating Partner at SV Health, former CEO of Innovate UK. SV Health is a transatlantic healthcare specialist known for company creation and full spectrum biotech investing. They have a standout win called EyeBio, who also won the Exit of the Year this year at the EUVC Awards. They sold EyeBio for a whopping $1.3 billion upfront to Merck and up to $3 billion in subject to hitting exact milestones. Am I correct in putting it like that?
Yeah.
And of course, also the recent launch of Driag Therapeutics with $140 million to tackle neuropsychiatry. Before we start the show, a quick note. If you're building or running a fund, you know it takes the right partners. At EUVC, we only work with sponsors we truly believe should be part of your tech stack. Please do take a moment to hear about them. And if you do, reach out, mention EUVC. It's the best way you can support what we do. Thank you so much. First up, ACE Alternatives. Every fund manager needs clean operations behind the scenes. From fund admin to tax and compliance, ACE handles it all across VC, PE, private debt, and real assets. They're trusted by some of the best investors in the world, and if you want peace of mind and a scale-ready back office, ACE should be part of your stack. Finding deals and managing your portfolio is at the heart of running a fund. Synaptic helps you discover status before others do, and Portfolio IQ keeps your portfolio data sharp and ready for LPs. Together, they're essential tools for modern fund managers. When it comes to legal, you need a team that truly knows venture. Haynes Boone supports LPs, GPs, startups, and scale-ups across the full fund lifecycle. Smart managers make Haynes Boone part of their stack. We have two at EUVC. Tech Barbecue. Oh my God, who doesn't love barbecue? Europe's startup scene meets the loudest, friendliest family reunion ever at Tech Barbecue. From Nordic founders to global VCs, this is where ideas catch fire and relationships get real. If you're building or backing in Europe, Tech Barbecue is where you want to show up. And hey, if you've got a big fun announcement coming up, want to hit the headlines, or just want to tell your story out, do reach out to us because we'd love to help. And we've got some killer partners to help you get in the right media places. They've helped us land Bloomberg, CNBC, Financial Times, Forbes, and many more for the EUVC Summit, and we'd love to do the same for you.
This was their finest hour.
Tear down this wall.
It's more than just an alliance. This is a union of values.
Let's start acting.
This show is not investment advice, and the hosts of this episode may be invested in the funds and companies featured.
Welcome to the podcast, both of you.
Andreas, I don't want to be pedantic, but it's pronounced Driag. It's Welsh for dragon and it's Driag. And at Driag, if anybody says Driag, we make them put some money in the pot.
I'll bring some money next time because I'm sure I'll continue doing it throughout the podcast. Driag, I'll remember that one. Welcome to the podcast, both of you. Congrats on your massive success.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
So the majority of our podcasts are for what we might call traditional VC. So most people will be very knowledgeable of everything normal tech, like B2B SaaS models, maybe even deep tech. But biotech is one of the harder things to grab as someone just in the normal tech ecosystem. Could you talk a little bit about maybe how to fully understand and prepare for today's conversation if you're someone a little less used to the biotech scene?
So what we do at SV is invest in therapeutics, and by that we really mean drugs. And so these are things that can ultimately be medicines. They're either first in class, so very novel medicines, as opposed to the next generation of paracetamol or something like that. These are drugs that really can move the needle on patient outcomes in areas of very high unmet medical need. And what we do is take this very early science, so a long time before these drugs are sold, and help these drugs go through different clinical milestones, which they have to go through, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, in order to ultimately become approved. And as investors, what we do is provide the funding to do that and help the companies navigate their path through development to ultimately get these drugs to the patients that need them most.
Yeah, and I've spent 27 years in the pharma industry, and that really is a grounding to help SV and the companies that we invest in do the right sorts of experiments, do the right type of clinical trials, so that ultimately pharma companies will see them as quality. They'll want to acquire them, as they did with EyeBio, for example, or create a company that has such a sustainable set of molecules that we can actually IPO.
All right. So then tell me, why is it that you've chosen to keep company creation, venture, and later stage under one roof?
So there's two different, I think, ways of thinking about that. One of those is from the perspective of the people who invest in us. Some of the new company creation opportunities are potentially very high return, but they're higher risk. Because they're generally earlier in development, and generally things that are earlier in development have more reasons why they can fail as they go through the subsequent stages of development. Whereas things that are in later development may have a lower upside from a returns perspective, but also they have less risk attached to them. And so what we're trying to do is really diversify risk across the portfolio at the fund level. And that's one of the reasons why, from our investors' perspectives, we want to offer a diversified risk profile across the fund. And that's also why we have a number of investments in each fund, normally sort of 12 to 15 investments in every fund. I think the other side of it is, from being a really high quality late stage investor, I think you can apply some of those learnings to early stage investing and vice versa. And so I think actually there is a real advantage, a competitive advantage, in having a team whose skill set is very broad from that perspective, rather than having one that's very focused on early stage, but then maybe less experienced as their companies evolve into later stage opportunities. But you've done lots of company creation, but also on the board of the company that's been acquired in phase 3. So
I think when you say company creation, people might think, well, company creation is right at the very beginning, where you're trying to identify a target. You don't really even have a lead molecule, far less a development candidate. But actually, we've created companies at different stages. So Driag, we created that company when it already had phase 1 data, thanks to some fantastic work done by its founders, work that was funded by the Wellcome Trust, the MRC. They actually had phase 1 data. So, in most instances, you wouldn't think of a company creation at that stage. So if you really portion things up in a very structured way, you miss the opportunities for learning across, as you said, but you also might end up with companies that don't fit into one of those 3 categories, and therefore it's really hard to invest in it. We wouldn't want that.
Tell me, just because you also have the transatlantic angle, tell me, where does Europe and the UK have a true edge right now? Is it in talent, translational science? Is it some advantaged assets that we have here in Europe more than other places?
I think it's a combination of
I'd say, I'd look at it from a scientific perspective, and then you probably look at it from more of a financial perspective. But when I think of how we've invested, some of those companies we've created, and some of them are opportunities that have come to us. Of the ones that we've created, I'd say it's a network of really high quality science, often with people who've come from the pharma industry, that have moved from industry either into an academic setting or, just working in a network. So I think we've got real strength in science, so really real strength in company creation. And I think that kind of entrepreneurial spirit is growing in the UK. It's always been strong in the US. I don't think we would deny that. And I see a lot more of it in the UK now too.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key statistic about the UK is that 4 of the top 10 global research universities are in the UK. So the UK sort of punches a long way above its weight from a scientific perspective, I think, from a sort of foundational research perspective. And where we see the real opportunity there is that that hasn't translated necessarily yet into a biotech ecosystem that reflects that sort of 4 out of 10 of the top universities. And so I think that's what funds like us can help do, is fund that academic science into companies ultimately, and ultimately help those companies develop drugs.
Yeah, I mean, we could talk specifically about the creation of Driag if you think that would be a useful thing to do.
Yeah, I was actually going there in just a second. I just wanted to ask one question, because we should get much more into company creation.
Sure.
But I'd love to ask you just a question on where we are in this cycle right now for biotech, because of course everyone knows that tech tends to go up and down, and we have ebbs and flows of where it's nicer or better to be in the sector than others. Where are we right now in biotech? Is this the top of a cycle, or are we in the bottom of it, somewhere in the middle?
So I think it's been a challenging period in biotech. I mean, the public markets have been closed until very recently.
Yeah.
Although we're seeing really positive things actually in psychiatry. I mean, there's one company that's just IPO'd LV, and then there's another that is in the works too.
Yeah,
Both of those are psychiatry companies. So actually, I think that there are some green shoots, but I would say it's been a challenging market environment. Equally, we were really at the top of a cycle through COVID, and that was probably overvaluing the sector. So there was some natural correction, and that's also precipitated caution. There's a political environment in the US that I think has been slightly challenging for the biotech sector and from the regulatory perspective. But I would say things now feel like they are improving.
Yeah, I think I feel things are improving. And also we talk about biotech as if it's one thing, but actually I'd say neuroscience is in the ascendancy. You know, ophthalmology has had a really good run with EyeBio particularly. There's been some great exits in neuroscience. So I think that's a strong area, maybe doing a bit less oncology than we have done in the past. So, you know, across the different therapeutic areas, we see, you know, balancing up and down. For investment, yeah, I think it's been hard. I mean, I know we raised 140 million, but generally it has been hard for companies in the last year to raise really significant amounts of money. But I see that it's moving.
Yeah. And I think there's been a shift in the market during COVID. The sorts of things that were able to raise lots of money were generally very broad platforms, which were sort of very high science, but we're a long way away from drugs. And the things now that have found it much easier to raise money are companies which have very clear programs that look like they could ultimately become drugs that are commercially extremely valuable. And that's one of the reasons why Driag was so successful in raising that money, because the lead program there looks like it could be really transformative in the space that it's being developed in.
We keep teasing Driag, but I'm going to keep you from it 1 second, because Ruth, you just mentioned a very yes, Ruth, you just mentioned a very interesting breakdown of the different sciences or parts within biotech. What is it that drives oncology to be less important right now or less investable right now, and another?
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I mean, it's still investable. I think it's a matter of there are a lot of opportunities in oncology, and pharma companies have made quite a lot of acquisitions and built their own portfolios. And so there's a lot of choice. Whereas actually in neuroscience, there's less choice and a lot more interest.
Yeah.
So I think that's the difference, you know, and then cycles. So everybody was out of neuroscience 10 years ago, and now it's coming back.
And what drives this? What drives, if we take neuroscience as an example, what drove everyone to be out 10 years ago and then everyone to be very much in today?
Okay, well, extensive failure is never a good look. So when a lot of drugs did not do well in late stage clinical trials, you know, and I worked in pharma at the time, you know, so people want to invest in biotech and in pharma companies in areas where there's a big unmet need and you know how to make the drugs. So in oncology, we had a fantastic increase in the scientific understanding of which patient should get which drug based on the genetics of their tumour. And that really opened up the area and brought forward lots more oncology drugs. In psychiatry and neurodegeneration, in fact, neuroscience generally, that degree of stratification, as we call it, really hasn't existed until recently. So in Alzheimer's disease, for example, we now have blood-based biomarkers. So we have tools to begin to understand who should get the drugs that are being developed. And in psychiatry, we now have sort of the emergence of a lot of digital and tracking tools that allow us to understand who's unwell and what type of drug is likely to be useful for them. So I think it's the emergence of the best assessments, the best tools to match patients with the appropriate drugs in clinical trials and beyond. That's what's changed.
You're like a lexicon. I'm really enjoying this, Ruth. Then tell me, AI. We don't have it anywhere else in the script. We'll only touch on it now. How does the current AI boom that we're all talking about in tech, how does that kind of come through to?
Well, let's take that.
Yeah. You go now.
Also, I love this stuff. So there's a lot of hype about AI, but I'll give you a few specific examples of where we've used it, and it's been fantastic. So one of the areas that's really emerging is speech analytics and being able to break down speech into different features. So, for example, people who suffer from depression are very slow to respond to a question. And when you're interviewing somebody with depression, which is what you need to do, there's a set of questionnaires that are used for assessing depression. If you use speech analytics while doing that, you can now begin to get an understanding of, is this person truly depressed? How depressed are they? What sort of depression do they have? That sort of analytics is really making a difference in terms of understanding patients and their needs. And I'll give you a very specific example of how we used large language models. It's a trivial example, but it just made a huge difference for us. When we were fundraising, we had some very, very technical evaluation of our lead molecule using MEG, which is magnetoencephalography, incredibly complicated stuff, analysing the brain waves in multiple dimensions in a patient. So we interviewed the incredibly clever guy, Chris Singh, who did the experiments. We interviewed him for an hour, and then we got a large language model system to turn it into a question and answer, which we checked with him on how it worked and what we'd found. And that took 8 minutes. And we were able to use that in our fundraising to explain to people what our drug did and how we'd done something really novel, really different in a way that anyone could understand. And I thought I was going to have to actually do that piece of work. And I put aside 2 days because this is not simple stuff. But, thank you. 8 minutes and we were there.
And here, of course, you mentioned it as our fundraising. In this case, it's for Driag. Am I right?
Yes, it is. Now shall I tell you my exciting story?
Yes, please tell us your exciting story.
I couldn't wait, could I? So Charles and I have actually been working on the formation of Driag for 18 months, and for six months at least before we got the seed investment. So Driag is formed by 2 founders from Cardiff University, from the Medicines Discovery Institute there. So both professors, John Atack and Simon Ward, and they came from Pharma. So I worked with John at Merck. Simon had been at GSK. They'd worked at other companies, Biotech, since then. And then they moved into a university setting and they set up their own Medicines Discovery Institute. They got funding from the Wellcome Trust, from the MRC, actually from the Welsh Government. And they developed their own portfolio of molecules. And, they're in my network. I've known them for a while. But we saw what they had in the pipeline at the MDI. And, we had this idea, if we took 3 of the most advanced molecules, we could form this into a company. Up until that point, they'd been, shopping them asset by asset to Pharma or Biotech. And there was a better opportunity to be built there. So we spoke to them, we brought them in, we did some what we would call prepared mind sessions to think about how we would develop those molecules, which the best assets were, put together a business case, which I think they would have struggled to do on their own, an investment business case. And then SV agreed that they would be the first investors, and then ICG followed. Do you want to add to that?
I was going to add, just drawing on some of the things we talked about already, sort of why did we think that this was the right thing to do? And the conversations that you and I had, like you said, it was 6 months before we actually had seeded these assets. We had an idea that we wanted to do a company in psychiatry because that was an area that had been underinvested in, and therefore there was a lot of opportunity there and there was less competition. And your Cerevel experience was certainly as a relay there, given the market cap of that company. But also the technologies that you just referred to really understand the different kinds of depressed patients and to characterize them in a way that meant that the challenges the long history of failure, as you referred to it, may be able to be reduced. And so it was a more ripe area for investment. There was more sort of upside than had previously been the case. And that was one of the reasons that I think we got very interested.
And we looked at many other things, didn't we? There were pharma companies that were releasing assets for investment. We looked at those. And actually, my judgment was that the assets that they had developed at the University of Cardiff were quantifiably and in evidence better than many of the things that we'd seen from Pharma. And some of those have gone into companies and they might do fine. But scientifically, I thought this portfolio of assets was stronger by far.
And from an investment perspective, they hadn't had the same level of investment as the pharma companies' asset portfolios had into them. And so from thinking about that as an investor, the sort of deal that we could construct here has a lot more upside than if you were to take a pharma asset that had been heavily invested in and therefore came with that kind of a price tag into a new company.
Can you just contrast this to EyeBio and the journey with EyeBio?
Well, it has some similarities, actually. And I'd say the similarities were that EyeBio was formed by deep experts in ophthalmology that actually SV had worked with before. And here we have some deep experts in psychiatry. The assets were reasonably well thought through and advanced, I would say. And the company formed quite quickly because we had a network of, for Driag, I'm saying, we had a network of people that could literally jump in and get going. So the founders came in. Obviously, I came in as exec chair to start with. Dave Watson came in as COO, and then Maxim Smith. So we had a core of 5 people to just get the company up and running, which we did really quickly. And Maxim really did a lot of work on putting together the investment deck and really working on getting us a nice story, a really well put together story. So 5 people, 5 good men, that's all you need. Or 4 and a woman is fine.
I mean, I completely agree. I think actually I would say that the Driag portfolio is more mature than the EyeBio portfolio was to start with, but the scientific promise of both of those lead programs was really top tier. And that is what really attracted us ultimately to those and made us think it's worth to establishing a company around it. So we had the right domain expertise in our venture partner network to lead those companies, David Geyer in EyeBio and you in Driag.
I mean, it does always come down to the quality of the assets. Are they really good? Does the team know how to develop them? And every time you raise funds, that's what the investors all want to know. When's the value inflection point? How long is it going to take you to get there? How much is it going to cost? I mean, that's what everybody wants to know. And going in with a well thought through narrative on that story is really important.
Let me just get a second up into the helicopter here and look at, because now we spoke about 2 specific assets. One of them obviously out the gates with an incredible 150 million euro seed round or whatever we choose to call that. And the other one ending up with a $3 billion exit if everything goes well. Could you just talk about the returns profile in this, both on the individual asset, what you can expect there, maybe contrast this type of investment versus the company creation type investment versus some of the later stage stuff you also do, and make people that listen in with an LP angle understand what is the opportunity in this space and why is it that you're able to do this? Because if we look at EyeBio, we named it or awarded it the exit of the year. It was an incredible story. 4 years since inception or so that you exited it at $3 billion. Can't remember how much money was invested in that period, but it was not too much.
Yeah. So from a returns profile perspective, there's a couple of different points I think in there. But in general, company creation type investments, we would expect probably have a higher risk associated with them because they're generally earlier stage of development, although I think Driag is a slight anomaly there. And because of that, we can own more of those companies. We're investing at a lower valuation. Ultimately, the upside is far bigger, and you could be getting exits north of 10x times your money as a return. We balance that in the portfolio with later stage investments, which are potentially lower risk but have a lower upside, and so that we have a really diversified portfolio from an LP perspective. And that's sort of how I think about how do those 2 kinds of investments, and there's obviously it's a spectrum, right? But how do those different kinds of investments fit together? Specifically in company creation, one of the things that SV does when they create companies is we take also some founder shares because we are the people who provided the initial funding to actually bring all these people and the management team together. And that also gives us another kick on our returns, because as well as the equity that you get for the investments, we also attract some equity for bringing together the ideas and the people to establish actually these new companies.
But that is the fun part of it. So Driag is the 5th company that I've been involved in putting together with SV. And, some of them I just did a bit at the beginning. And as soon as we got people that knew what they were doing, I wasn't really required anymore. But with Driag, this one I particularly like because, I've been intimately involved with the company for 18 months. And I've been interim CEO. Our real CEO is arriving in a month's time. We've got a fantastic chair that we've hired. The Series A investors have formed a really, really good board. And so this feels to me like I've lived with this company for longer. Mm-hmm. So maybe I've just loved it a bit more. But the others they've all been really exciting companies to start. So, Astronautics is based on really fabulous new science, which is the way that the brain removes toxic species at night. So really using this new system, not discovered that long ago, called lymphatic clearance, to take out amyloid, tau, in fact, any accumulating aggregatory element in the brain that you just don't need and don't want. That was a fantastic one. Alchemab, again, another fantastic company and a platform company, not a therapeutics company, where Jane Osborne and Rachel Bashford-Rogers came up with a way of finding protective antibodies in human blood. And if you can find a protective antibody, that in itself becomes the therapeutic. So that was a super idea. And that company's also doing very well. And then the others that I've been involved in, Lockers 23, which is a Huntington's company, and Cumulus Neuroscience, which is a company that actually builds some of those digital assessments that I spoke about earlier that are used in clinical studies across neuroscience generally. So a variety there, which I think speaks to your portfolio piece. Yeah, it is the fun part. I might have said that already.
This is a true masterclass. Okay, let me just then understand one thing, because you spoke about it as well, the platform versus asset-centric therapeutics versus a platform, and also the open-ended discovery approach that can also be taken in this space. Can you both expand a bit on the concepts that I described super poorly here, and then say how you employ those?
The platform companies are generally earlier. They take more investment. And from my perspective, I think they're more at risk of being superseded by another technology. And so when we invest in a platform company, we really have to understand what the value inflection is going to be for that platform. And so for Alchemab, for Jane's company, it was very easy to see that you could, as soon as you found the antibodies, you got the opportunity to make a therapeutic. So I would say on balance, we have more therapeutics companies, more biologics, drugs, even new modalities. We have more of those sort of platforms.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think we're very sort of product centric. I think our instances, Alchemab is a really good example where we think that the platforms are producing things that are much closer to drugs. And I think platforms are a very broad term, where you can have discovery biology platforms, which are really identifying just new targets, but that is a long way away from generating even a drug to preclinically start exploring that biology. Whereas you can have things like Alchemab, where actually what you're doing is identifying the antibody which is going to be your therapeutic, and you can much more quickly develop those. So I think that sort of captures quite a broad range.
And we do look at quite a lot of platform companies, but the challenge that I see with them is how you're going to get your return in a reasonable time frame. So if it's a platform, as you say, to identify a target, that you then got to identify a molecule and you then got to take that through clinical trials, that's a very long run. And it just doesn't quite have the speed, the return, the inflection points that you need to see for a very good investment. So sometimes you come across, ones that are just fantastic, but it's not the majority of our portfolio, is it?
Yeah, and I'd say ultimately the things that drive the returns are the programs. And actually the programs are what validates that the platform has value in itself. The platform isn't valuable if it's not able to produce a drug. And so ultimately you generally are going to be judged. The platform will be judged against the first few programs it produces.
Yeah, and Pharma will acquire a company for its assets, much less likely for its platform. And that's certainly my experience when I was at Pfizer, when I was at Merck. We're more interested, Pharma's more interested in the next really well-validated drug with great clinical data rather than something that's an exploratory new technology just does not command the same return.
From an investor perspective, I think one of the things that is attractive about platforms is that you can bring in additional capital through business development deals with pharma that can actually help you, that you can leverage against your proprietary programs. And so there definitely is some advantage to that. And you can, if you can have actually the investors not be the ones who pay for the platform, it's people who are doing deals with it pay for the platform.
So there's a licensing opportunity there, and you can license the platform many times over, but it's still not going to give you your 3V return.
Yeah, it's not going to drive your exit. It's just going to bring in additional capital to reduce the burden on the investors.
Take the risk out.
My feeling is that when we look at the tech bio investors that have come in, that are interested, so to say, probably primarily on the back of AI and the opportunities that that is creating, that is primarily on the platform side that they're interested. Am I not correct?
Yeah, so the interest, I think, is on the platform side with AI, is in identifying a small molecular drug more quickly, or being able to predict the properties of molecules. That's where the excitement is. And I think pharma companies are licensing those sort of AI approaches directly from companies. So, but they're more likely to license than acquire. And my knowledge and experience of companies, pharma companies that I've been in, is they want to use the technology. They want to be able to use it for their own programs, particularly, rather than out license their programs to a company that has some specific or some novel platform technology or AI ability. I'm a little worried, I'll be honest, that the use of AI has been somewhat overstated, and we might see a bit of a contraction in that space. We'll see.
Given what you say here, that the acquirers are not really interested in acquiring that type of company, the play is then to IPO, and the assumption, so to say, by the VCs that back these types of companies is that the platform might be big enough and the team might be able to turn it into what we in defense would call a prime.
So we might not be the people to talk about that, since we don't have many of those sorts of companies in our portfolio. We don't really have anything like a digital tech company like that, or a tech bio company. We don't have a lot of those.
I mean, Alchemab is not that, but that is the closest. And actually, although I don't think pharma are as interested in buying platforms as they are in buying products, because they really want to try to buy revenue streams. It's much harder to predict what your revenue stream is for your platform than it is for your products. But actually, I can see the Alchemab platform as one that pharma would be interested in acquiring because of the unique features of that platform and how quickly it can discover drugs. Which isn't necessarily true of some of the others.
But I think so there's some great AI companies. I'm thinking about companies like Benevolent AI, companies that use data in a different way to identify repurposed drugs or to find a faster way through optimizing chemistry. But that technology is always developing. So if you buy it, you kind of bought it at a stage when it is, it's now locked in, and there'll be another technology along in a while. And when I was in pharma, I really spoke to a lot of technology companies, and we licensed some, but we didn't acquire any of them.
Thank you for going down this route with me. I just wanted to hear the take from someone who's obviously knee deep in biotech, and then for whatever reason, or as you just described, have decided platforms and pure tech plays in this space is not exactly what we want to do.
There are investors that do that, and they are deep in it and very knowledgeable. It's just not quite the sweet spot.
Yeah, so I meant hearing your perspective on why you've decided not to do it and why it's not a fit for you. So that was interesting to hear. Okay, then let me go back to company creation. I just want to hear one quick thing, because company creation is something that historically most firms do not do very well. You do it very well because you're very specialist. But I'd love to ask you, how do you stand up the founding team? Because that's one of the things where it often goes wrong.
Well, I would say for the companies that we have created, identifying the founders, and they usually come with the ideas and they're in our network. So finding the founders, finding somebody that can, physically set a company up, the legals, contracting, all of that, putting a team together is the fun part. And actually, SV has a really huge network of people for this.
I mean, I think actually very often the way the founding team sort of comes with the opportunity, or a component of the founding team comes with the opportunity. In the case of Driag, we had John and Simon, obviously, and you pulling that company together.
Plus, we had David and Caroline Ben.
David Geyer, we had EyeBio, alongside Tanya Damus. So generally, I think that part of the investment thesis for us is a great opportunity, but also we've got the person to go and execute on that opportunity. And generally, you want both of those ingredients at the beginning.
And very often it's the scientists that come, and then you need to put a support system around them to actually make it a company, to take it from an academic set of thinking to a business and milestone driven way of thinking. And getting the founders to think like that, to be like that, is part of the journey. And, sometimes it takes a while. If they've been in a biotech or a pharma company before, they get it much more easily than if they've only ever been in academia. And I say those are the ones that are a little bit harder, and founders very often, understandably think, well, it's my scientific idea, it's my company, but they don't actually know how to raise money, how to deal with the board, how to create the right relationships, how to lay out the portfolio in a way that investors will understand. So there's a lot more to founding a company than having a great scientific idea.
You're thinking about capitalizing a new company. If you start with a solo versus syndicate, what do you prefer? What one do you prefer, one over the other?
I would always start with what is the right plan to take the idea that you've got, or the program that you've got, through to the next stage or next several stages of value inflection and de-risking milestones. And then I think you need to, once you understand that plan and how much does that plan cost to deliver, that is when you understand how do you want to fund the plan, and the scope of the funding required.
Driag, for example, we did a lot of work in SV, and then ICG came in at seed. And then with seed, we were able to develop the plans for the clinical trial, really lay everything out, work out how much it was going to cost us to develop the lead asset, to take the second two assets forward. And then we went out and raised a Series A with a very specific plan. And we were looking to raise $100 million to start with, which ended up at 140 because, as we refined it a bit more, we thought we might build in a bit of a longer runway. And then actually our lead investor, Liam Ratcliffe, he said, look, I think you probably want to build in another clinical study here. So let's just put in a bit more money and make sure we've got the capacity to do something else in addition to the study that you proposed. And other investors agreed with that. And so his term sheet was the term sheet that prevailed. That's really the basis on which the Series A was funded, and the company has moved forward. And we've hired, 25 people now in a year. Some in the US, some in the UK, one in Switzerland. So it's all moving really very quickly.
Let me ask you also about kill criteria and discipline, because it's obviously very important that you have objective gates when you get into it, but it's also incredibly important that you know when to pull the plug, when to pivot, or when to just double down. How do you navigate this?
That was sort of what I was getting at with the de-risking milestones. But we actually had one of those in Driag, which we clearly met in target engagement, which you've already spoken about.
At the very beginning, just when we were at seed, we were saying if we cannot show that our drug engages the target, we've got more work to do. I'm not sure we're going to put a lot of money into this company, and we're not sure it's going to get off the starting blocks. But that was a very important go, no-go decision, where the team had actually already laid out the study, but we didn't have the data yet. So the study was ongoing when we came in at seed, wasn't it? But the data that came out, and we had it validated by other experts, was that we could show target engagement. We knew the drug got into the brain. We knew it activated the receptor. We could measure that. So that was a really key experiment. But I look at this from a scientific perspective. Companies are founded on science, and scientists are seekers of truth. So you always have to think about what is the one killer thriller experiment that will tell me if my thesis is right or wrong. The wrong approach is to keep trying to do experiments to justify what you already think. That's not the way to do science. The way to do science is, what's the one experiment? Tell me if I'm right or wrong. And when you get that, before you even get that data, you have the team think through, if the outcome looks like one thing, what do we do? If it looks like something else, what do we do? And you go through all of the different options so that when the data comes in, you don't start arguing about, well, maybe it's not that. Maybe you've already thought through what you're going to do, which we did for the phase 1 data for Driag, and we've already done it for the phase 2 data. So you don't kind of get into the what's the killer experiment. You thought about that upfront, and you've also thought about the consequences. And sometimes it's best to say it was a great hypothesis, didn't turn out to be right. Can we use the molecule somewhere else, which is always a good thing to think about? Or is this whole area done? We either move on to another asset in the portfolio, or worst case scenario, or you give the money back.
Yeah, you shut the company down.
Yeah.
There's so much we could talk about. And Ruth, I want to make sure that we make it to talk about dementia and your knowledge here, which is quite unrivaled. So let me ask you a quick question about Driag, because that will get us into it. And what I want to ask you is the neuropsychiatry as a European opportunity. I'd love to understand just what is it that is making now the moment for something like Driag?
So I think it's the scientific advances, it's the level of interest. Unfortunately, the incidence of psychiatric disorders is going up. We are really heading for a very substantial mental health crisis if we don't develop some really good new therapeutics, well, and other modalities. I'm not dismissing cognitive behavioral therapy, things like that. So there is a global rise in mental health problems. But at the same time, there's an increase in value, and it's perfect for us. So if you look at the exit at Cerevel, Karuna, MapLight, IPO, there's a whole cluster of really good companies that have had exits in this space. So I think neuroscience is really, really, really important. In order to do a better job, I have to separate psychiatry and neurology because the things that are being developed are slightly different. But the one area where I think we could do something really foundational is to increase the speed and the quality of clinical trials. If we can make those trials shorter, more effective, as in, smaller number of people required to show a significant effect, then I think that would move the whole field on incredibly. So I've been working on the UK government's Dementia Goals programme. And one of the things that we have been advocating for is creating a registry of people who are pre-consented, who want to take part in clinical trials. There's lots of different ways of doing that. But ideally, if you're running some of those really big studies, which you need to do in psychiatry or neurology, if you need 500 patients and you've got 5 European countries that have registries, you could be able to get your 500 patients all on day one. And then your clinical trial would take a fraction of the time, would be a fraction of the cost. The returns would be higher. You get to patients more quickly. I think that is one area where we could really make progress.
And I imagine that this is also because of what I want to ask you now is Europe's capital stack for neuro. And I imagine that this is one of the places where we're actually making good headway in terms of being able to come together as a continent, so to say. But tell me what's working, what's missing, and where can our community of founders and VCs and pharmas and clinicians listening in to concretely help?
I think there's some great pre-competitive consortia just on a more academic and scientific level. And, IHI is fantastic, and the building of registries is really good. Having large databases for depression, for example, a fantastic database in the Netherlands. So there are communities doing really good work there. But I think when it comes to investment and returns, I'm going to give that one to you, Charles.
Yeah, I think the gap in Europe, and this has been a gap for forever, I guess, really, is that the depth of capital, certainly beyond the early venture stage, is missing. And so all of our companies, if they go public, for example, we would take them public on the NASDAQ in the US. And generally, the investors who invest in those IPOs are predominantly US-based investors, like the mutual funds, funds like that. I think if there was a deeper pool of local capital that would fund through the growth stage, and it's one of the things that we want to be able to do at SV, that would mean that we could build more of these companies where they start off longer term and ultimately through to market. And there are examples in Europe of companies doing that, companies like Argenx, although that is public on the NASDAQ. But there are lots of examples of that. And I think they're catalytic. So I think the more, as those companies start maturing and becoming commercial, if they can do that in Europe, more will follow. And I think we saw something like that with Genentech originally in San Francisco. I mean, that was catalytic to that ecosystem there. So I think it's a case of more local capitals that help those companies not need to relocate to the US or Israel.
I agree with you, Charles. We've got scientific ideas, we've got early investment. It's the growth capital that is the gap. I don't think anybody would disagree with that in our field.
Mm-hmm.
Similar to the rest of the European tech story. Let me ask both of you, let me go to you first, Ruth. You led Innovate UK. I'd love to understand exactly what you learned there that the rest of Europe should learn from, so that we can better accelerate dementia neurotranslation.
Yeah, so Innovate UK, it was a very interesting experience because I'm a neuroscientist. I worked in pharma, and then for 3 years, I had to represent innovation across all different areas. So I had to represent innovation on the automotive industry, quantum technology, plastic electronics, things I know nothing about. What did I learn? I learned government is a very interesting place. I learned that I really like doing biotech. It takes a very special person to be that broad, and I'm not really that broad, so I'm just sticking to what I love and I know, and I feel a lot more comfortable. What I would say, though, about Innovate UK, which is really important, is so many companies that we know have had Innovate UK grants, and investors recognise that that is a mark of quality. And I also sit on something called the McRobert Award, is the Royal Academy of Engineering's annual award. And the company that won it this year, Organox, an organ transplantation company, they would not exist, they said, if they hadn't got their first Innovate UK award. And we have many companies that they get to a bit of a challenging point, maybe after seed, before Series A, where they're able to get Innovate UK awards, and it kind of gives them a lift and a boost. Astronautics was one of those. So I've learned that funding small companies is catalytic for them. And that's what Innovate UK does well, even though my own personal experience was one that kind of told me to stick to my knitting, really.
Well, what you lack in breadth, I definitely think that everyone who has listened in today have learned that you definitely make up for in depth. Ruth and Charles, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. Ruth, you were afraid, can we really talk for 60 minutes about all of this? We now made it to the end of the time, which is 3:30 in Denmark and 2:30 in the UK.
I can talk for more than I thought I could. Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure, Andreas.
Thank you.
Congrats, both of you, on all the massive success you've had so far. I thank you. I think we're all afraid of what awaits us with mental health in our time to come. It's not a simple time. I think that we all have people close to us affected. So thank you for the important work you're doing. Before we start the show, a quick note. If you're building or running a fund, you know it takes the right partners. At EUVC, we only work with sponsors we truly believe should be part of your tech stack. Please do take a moment to hear about them. And if you do, reach out, mention EUVC. It's the best way you can support what we do. Thank you so much. First up, Ace Alternatives. Every fund manager needs clean operations behind the scenes. From fund admin to tax and compliance, Ace handles it all across VC, PE, private debt, and real assets. They're trusted by some of the best investors in the world, and if you want peace of mind and a scale-ready back office, Ace should be part of your stack. Finding deals and managing your portfolio is at the heart of running a fund. Synaptic helps you discover status before others do, and Portfolio IQ keeps your portfolio data sharp and ready for LPs. Together, they're essential tools for modern fund managers. When it comes to legal, you need a team that truly knows venture. Haynes Boone supports LPs, GPs, startups, and scale-ups across the full fund lifecycle. Smart managers make Haynes Boone part of their stack. We have two at EUVC. Tech Barbecue. Oh my God, who doesn't love barbecue? Europe's startup scene meets the loudest, friendliest family reunion ever at Tech Barbecue. From Nordic founders to global VCs, this is where ideas catch fire and relationships get real. If you're building or backing in Europe, Tech Barbecue is where you want to show up. And hey, if you've got a big fun announcement coming up, want to hit the headlines, or just want to tell your story out, do reach out to us because we'd love to help. And we've got some killer partners to help you get in the right media places. They've helped us land Bloomberg, CNBC, Financial Times, Forbes, and many more for the EUVC Summit. And we'd love to do the same for you.
This was their finest hour.
Tear down this wall.
It's more than just an alliance. This is a union of values.
Let's start acting.